Here to talk about the upcoming election and the president's rally is New York Times opinion columnist and CBS News political analyst Jamelle Bouie. Jamelle, good morning. I want to start with the president's rally. Obviously, falling on the Juneteenth weekend. Originally, it should have been on Juneteenth, but he did move it, especially right now. Can you explain what the significance is of this Juneteenth holiday?
So Juneteenth celebrates the arrival of news of emancipation to enslaved people in Texas in 1865. In 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation is issued, but slave owners in Louisiana and Mississippi go west to Texas, and it doesn't reach their enslaved people until 2 years later. And I think the holiday, in addition to celebrating freedom, also is the acknowledgement of the distance between what is promised and what is lived. And so that's the significance, I think, especially in this moment when we're seeing with the killing of George Floyd, with the larger conversation about police brutality, very much the distance between what is promised as far as our rights as American citizens and what is actually lived as far as our rights as American citizens.
I'll take it, Jamelle. Joe Biden, you have said, has said, I'll seek to heal the racial wounds that have long plagued our country. The question is, for a lot of people with so much going on, is that enough to say? And what is the process moving forward for him?
You know, I think whether it's enough to say will depend on sort of where you are relative to those wounds. I think many Americans, many Black Americans, especially younger Black Americans who really are the ones driving much of this activity in the streets, will hear this and say maybe that's not really enough. And to the extent that Biden needs to do more, needs to say more, I think it's going to involve really doing the kind of outreach and work with younger Black Americans, younger Americans of color, younger Americans, period, to show them, persuade them, convince them that if elected president, his administration will take these things seriously, not just as a matter of rhetoric, but also as a matter of policy.
Well, with so many people out on the streets, Jamelle, you know, this president has contended he is the law and order president, but you contend, and you wrote, a law and order campaign just isn't available to Trump. Why?
You know, it's funny. Richard Nixon, who had sort of the first law and order campaign, could do so because he was not in power. He was the challenger to Lyndon Johnson. The last office that he held was vice president under Eisenhower. So he could say, in my previous position, we helped maintain the order, we helped maintain a sense of normalcy. But when you're actually in power, when you are the incumbent, when presumably you have the ability to maintain order, it's difficult, I'll say, to run a law and order campaign when the disorder is happening under your watch. And I think that's the president's fundamental problem, that voters will hear him say, I will be a law and order president, and they will reasonably say, well, if you were a law and order president, where is the law and order now?
Jamelle, last night in a TV interview, the vice president, Mike Pence, was asked about Juneteenth. He did speak about Juneteenth at length, but he was pressed on this. He would not say Black Lives Matter. What do you make of that, and what message does that send to voters?
So what I make of that is the extent to which the phrase Black Lives Matter is this kind of culture war football. It's interesting since majorities of Americans, I think a significant majority of Americans, agree that the Black Lives Matter movement is on the right track, on the right target, that there are these problems in policing and society that need to be addressed. But amongst some Americans, Black Lives Matter seems to be understood as like a provocation, as a statement of exclusivity. They add sort of a silent only to Black Lives Matter. And I think for Vice President Pence, who is, of course, a member of the Trump administration, those Americans, those voters, are part of the Trump coalition, these voters who are racially resentful. And so I think he's doing politics, right? He does not want to say something that may offend his voters. And I think this gets to sort of the key problem facing President Trump going in to the election, which is that he needs to expand his coalition beyond this base he assembled in 2016 on the basis of the kind of resentment against movements like Black Lives Matter. But he and his administration are just unwilling to do that. Even touting things like the low Black unemployment rate prior to the pandemic, touting the criminal justice reform his administration signed, isn't enough to make up for the fact that we have this wide-ranging social movement happening, and the president and his allies simply are unwilling to acknowledge it in a positive way and are frequently acknowledging it in a negative way.
All right, Jamelle, thank you very much for your time. The op-ed is Why Juneteenth Matters. It's worth a read. Jamelle Bouie, thanks very much.